What's up guys, it's Jack here, and today we're going to be going over Aphelios in my Challenger Season 11 Aphelios guide. So now first of all, I want to talk about the Aphelios build. Most people end up going Shield Bow first as their mythic. I think it's a very strong option right now on Aphelios, especially when you need survivability. And a champion like Aphelios is kind of all about damage, so being able to survive a little bit longer can give you a lot. I think Gale Force is another good option if you're versus long range comps, or mobility is very valuable. Versus certain skill shot reliant champions, Gale Force can be really valuable. I think maybe Shield Bow is a bit overrated. I think it's definitely the best option in most games, but I think Gale Force and Kraken both have a pretty good value. Kraken is really good when they have lots of bruisers and lots of tanky boys, champions that you'll be doing a lot of more auto attacks versus, while Shield Bow is a good mix of both, and Gale Force is really good versus these squishy, long range champions where you need to dodge stuff. Now for second item, I usually tend to go either Collector or PD. I sometimes go Hurricane if I'm really far behind and I feel like the only way I can win is if I can just farm up hundreds of minions and then be able to be useful again. Or if they have a comp that is perfect for Hurricane, in that I have a Rel Jarvan, that'll clump them all up, in which case Hurricane gets a lot of value. But most of the time I prefer PD because I think it gives you a decent bit of attack speed while also giving you AD, and I think it's a really strong seal item, although it's 50-50 for me between Collector and PD. Collector is good when you know they're not going to buy armor and you're versus squishy targets, while PD is better when they have a bit more bruisers and they're a bit more tanky and maybe they have some Taba here and there. And then Collector loses some value. And here you can see the win rates for the items, which I always like to look at. The stats are taken from Lolalytics. You can have a look at them yourself. And to me, just having a look at this and seeing first glance is good to, make up your mind. I know some people do LDR second, or people ask me, why no LDR second? I think it's pretty suboptimal. Most of the time where you can go LDR second, usually a seal item will do you better from my experience, and then you can go either LDR third or go IE third and then LDR. But you can go Kraken into LDR and it would be okay, but it's pretty weak. You'll have a really weak 2 items, but you scale pretty well, and if they're stacking armor hardcore, it's kind of your only option. For situational items, I think Wit's End is a good option if they have lots of magic damage. I think BT can be good for the healing and the shield. GA, standard, if they have assassins. Mercurial Scimitar for the QSS, and Spirit Visage is another good option. Synergize as well with Shield Bow, synergize as well with your Red Gun, and especially if you have a healing or shielding support, really good item. Now for runes, I actually think all 3 keystones in the precision tree are pretty viable in Press the Attack, Lethal Tempo, and Conquer. I prefer Lethal Tempo. Most people go Conquer. Some one-tricks really like PTA. PTA is very strong in lane, but falls off. Conquer is pretty good all around. It doesn't help as much in the early game as Lethal Tempo does, and it also helps your abilities more, while Lethal Tempo helps your auto attacks more. I prefer playing Aphelios more like a hyper carry in terms of auto attacks than abilities, but some people prefer more as a one-shot ability machine, and for them, Conquer is really good. I think both Conquer and Lethal Tempo, very strong options. I prefer Lethal Tempo. It's really easy to proc, synergizes well with your towers, the chakram towers, and you proc it really easily with blue, which makes it, for me, my go-to rune. Both options are fine. You can choose at your own leisure. And then I prefer to go Overheal since it has good synergy with your Red Gun. Some people go Presence of Mind. I find that I'm very rarely running so I don't really do it. I think both are fine options there. Wouldn't really go Triumph. I think Overheal and Presence of Mind are both better. Then in second, Bloodline, pretty much every game. Even though you're building Lifesteal, I still think it's better. And then you go Cut Down if they have tanks, and Coup if they have no tanks, no HP stackers. And for secondary, a lot of people go Domination with Ravenous Hunter, Taste of Blood. I think if you go Shield Bow, that's kind of overkill in terms of healing, and you should instead go Absolute Focus Gathering Storm in the Sorcery Tree. However, if you go Gale Force or Kraken, then Domination second is pretty good. And now I want to do just a quick overview of Aphelios' guns. First, let's go over green. You start the game with green and red. Green is the sniper. It gives you 650 range. It lets you bully a lot of lanes. And early game, Aphelios plays similar to Caitlyn due to his green gun, and when using green Q, you will strike the marked target with your offhand weapon. This is very important, so remember this. Red, it's your lifesteal gun, gives you sustain and healing on your autos, and ult, and red Q makes you do ton of small autos that apply your offhand weapons and on it. This used to be super broken with Kraken, but they nerfed it, so it's not that broken anymore, but it still applies Kraken, just at a lower damage. And purple, also known as Gravitum, it slows the enemy every time you auto-attack them, and when you activate it, you root them for a short duration. Has a lot of synergy with green Q, as you can root them to guarantee hitting your green Q. And then blue, the flamethrower, big AoE on attack. The AoE does little damage to minions early game, but does a lot to champs. And the blue Q shoots an AoE that applies your offhand weapon to each target hit. And then you have maybe Aphelios' strongest weapon, his chakrams, also known as white. Your autos are chakrams that has to return to you before you can auto again. However, when you stand melee, this makes you do a ton of DPS because the chakrams are returning so fast. So this shreds towers and has a lot of synergy with other weapons. And white Q places a tower based on your offhand weapon. And blue and green tower are the best. Now for weapon order. You can think of Aphelios' weapon order as sort of a queue. Whenever you use a weapon, you put it at the back of the queue. And the way that you get your preferred order of weapons is what weapons you use first. Now this weapon order is taken from Koog's Aphelios guide, and this is the one I try to aim for in most of my games since I think it's the best one. You want to go red, white, into green, into purple, into blue. And this way you get red into white, which is very strong, and then you use up red, and then you have green white, which is very strong, and then you get green purple, has good synergy as I talked about earlier, into then purple blue, which is also pretty strong. I think another thing you can look for is blue white, and then you get the blue towers, which can be really, really good in certain situations. But this is the weapon combo that I try to aim for in most situations. Now, the way to get this combo, it's pretty simple, but it's also kind of hard. So I'd recommend you to go into Practice Tool and try it. In all situations, other than the following two, make sure to empty your oldest gun first. Do not empty your newest gun before you empty the gun you obtained earlier. When the game starts, you want to get rid of Severum first. And when you first get Crescendum, you want to make sure that when Severum comes after it, you empty Severum before you empty Crescendum. And that's it. And when you maybe fuck up the weapon order, all you have to do is get the guns whose order you messed up and then empty the correct one first this time. So let's say I messed up and used my green first when I had red and green, and I had to use my red first. Then all I have to do is once I get red green again, I need to use up my red first. However, if you mess this up repeatedly, then it can become very cumbersome and it can be hard to keep track of it. And I, for a long time when I played Aphelios, did not have any track of my guns, and I was kind of just, whatever guns I had, it was whatever I had. But I think it's much better to kind of have like a semi-guide to follow like this, where you have a rough idea about what your weapon order should look like. And this way you always have good weapons, because you really want to avoid having like red-purple in a fight or white-purple. Those two, I think, are probably the two worst things you can have in terms of both damage and utility and just like usefulness. I've literally had games where I was super fed as Aphelios, and then we took a fight when I had red-purple, and we just lost, because my champ is like half as useful with those two weapons. Now for some tips and tricks on Aphelios. First of all, I want to talk about red Q into white. This is one of the most classic combos of Aphelios. This way you get a ton of chakrams and you do a ton of DPS. You want to use this bad boy on towers when you're fighting in combat. Ideally, you use the red Q on minions because it doesn't actually do that much damage, and then you're fighting with your chakrams. Another tip is to hold onto weapons with low ammo, and this way you can essentially use multiple weapons early game. So let's say when you have red-green in the early game and you're transitioning over to purple, what you can do is, let's say you're running out of red first, you can use your red Q, mark them with the green, and then when it swaps to purple, because you used up all your ammo from the red, then you also have purple Q now, so you use 3 abilities, and then you root them, and then your green ammo runs out, so then you have a blue flamethrower ability ready, and suddenly you just use 4 abilities in 3 seconds. Hopefully you understood what I was trying to say there. For another tip, something you can think about when you're playing with flamethrower is to look to poke the enemy in lane with blue auto attacks on minions. This is a really easy way to land a lot of damage. People don't really expect it that much. Even in high YOLO, people don't respect it. And it's really like just to annoy your enemy. It's like chip damage here and there, and it can add up. So it's something to definitely look for when you have blue. Another thing is the green-white tower. Very, very strong. I think a lot of people waste it a bit too much when I watch people play Aphelios. You want to look to place your tower in choke points, and you don't just want to like place the tower. A lot of people, they just put it down right in front of the enemy team, and it's like, yeah, what's that gonna do? It used to be that you could do that because the towers were super OP, but now they're much lower range, while the like range to activate them is still pretty long. So people can just activate it, then run out of range and kill it, and you don't get very much value out of it. So usually you want to place your tower in either bushes or choke points, and place it when the fight actually starts and not just as preparation. And this is especially true because your white ammo is usually your most valuable, since it's probably the strongest gun that you will have in a lot of games. So you don't really want to waste it too much unless it's like absolutely needed. Another tip that you can do is when you have green-white is you place down the tower and then you insta-swap to green and you Q. This way you kind of get the effect as if your tower insta-activates and you get a lot more damage off quickly. Another thing you can do with green is green flash Q. So you Q and then flash, and you can reposition your Q or just extend it, and it can catch people off guard. And also something to think about when you're running out of green ammo, when you Q and you have less than 10 ammo, let's say you use your green, right, and you have purple coming up next, then your main hand will be purple. So you would use the red, which was your offhand. So if you then wanted to use the purple that you just got from using your green, you would need to swap to red and then auto attack to get the purple, as an example. Another tip / trick, Infernum can be very useful for both stacking chakrams on minions or to insta-heal with Severum. It can both catch a lot of people off guard, and your Severum healing on Infernum can just be absolutely absurd. I've seen people go from literally 100 HP to full HP just with blue Q and red offhand. Something else to think about, if you activate the caliber mark within a certain distance out of AA range, there's no channel time on the auto, useful knowledge for green turret. Infernum Q range is longer than your AA range. Use this when you need to get one last auto attack or to surprise opponents. Using abilities while you're almost out of time in Crescendum timer extends it by half a second. So you can use this in combination with things like green turret, and this allows you to buy a few more seconds of power with your chakrams. Let's talk a little bit more about how to generally play Aphelios and some of his matchups. First few levels, you kind of play like Caitlyn. You look to space the enemy. You always auto enemy with green and minions with red. You want to have good spacing and abuse your range, and you can win most matchups this way. And you also want to abuse the weapon swap that I was talking earlier. Once you get purple, once you get blue, right? You want to try and fight when you're about to get these weapons so you can get more abilities off. And once you get blue, you want to abuse the AoE for wave control and also poke. And you want to use purple to set up your CC support or your jungle for ganks. A pretty deadly combo is if you have like a Thresh or Nautilus and you have purple on Aphelios, you flash forwards, root them into the CC of your support. And if you have your jungler coming as well, it's usually a free kill, right? And for some of the Aphelios matchups, I think some of his worst matchups are Varus, Ashe, and Syndra. And I think some of his best matchups are Samira, Vayne, Lucian, Sivir, Kai'Sa. I think biggest thing you should think of when thinking of Aphelios is how he works stylistically as a champ. Aphelios really likes champions that come into his range interacting with him, and he really dislikes champions that outranges him and doesn't let him do what he wants. Aphelios is a champ that has so many tools, but kind of limited in the way he can use them. He doesn't have any gap closer, and he doesn't have very much range. He has some range on his green, but that's about it, and his ult, right? So he has some tools, but much less so than a lot of other champs. So, in general, if the enemy team has a lot of poke, a lot of long range, I tend to avoid Aphelios, because I think it's very hard to play into that. And if I were to be an Aphelios one trick, I would probably permaban Ashe or Varus or Syndra. Maybe even MF right now, because she's starting to see more play too, and she's pretty annoying as well in that she has her slow from her E and her ult, right? A lot of these zone control champions makes it really hard to play Aphelios. If you're versus one of these really hard matchups, the best tip I can give you is to go longsword, 3 pots, and look to avoid their poke, right? If you're versus Ashe, if you're versus Varus, if you're versus Syndra, you need to have good movement, dodge these skill shots, try to survive through laning phase. Your champion still scales very, very well. You outscale all these 3 champs if you get your items. Aphelios is one of the best scaling champs in the game, so even if you have a bad matchup, it's not the end of the world. You just need to kind of suffer through it and try not to int. If you have a really good matchup, you want to look to abuse as much as you can, abuse the range advantage that you have, and just try to get chip autos here and there. Because usually in Aphelios' best matchups, right, he's versus these low range champions, so you want to outrange them and not let them get their all-in opportunity by making them too low to ever be able to all-in you. Another bonus, if you're considering to pick him, is Thresh. If you have a Thresh, it's a very good Aphelios game usually. He probably has the best synergy with Thresh in the entire game. It's a very well-known bread and butter combo. It scales very well. It gives Aphelios a lot of that utility I was talking about him lacking, and that mobility that he lacks. And it wins most lanes, scales well. You know, it got everything you want, pretty much. It still kind of struggles into some of the worst matchups I was talking about earlier, but at least you scale a bit better since you have more utility with the Lantern later on, and you have a lot of ganks set up for your jungler, so hopefully your jungler ganks. Now I want to talk a little bit about the mentality you should have when you're playing Aphelios. Aphelios is one of the strongest champions in the game when strong. Now, I know that sounds maybe weird, but he's a complete hyper carry that can single-handedly win team fights. If you get a big blue ult off, you can literally get a pentakill with just one spell. Very few other champions that can say that. And he's still somehow balanced, because he has these very defined weaknesses. So that's what you gotta play around as an Aphelios player. You have to be able to get your items, prioritize farming. If you're playing Aphelios, you gotta be aiming for 10 CS per minute every game, because you're a champion that if you get your items, if you get the resources, and you position properly, you can win most fights nearly solo, just due to how absurd your damage output gets to a certain point. That's why I think it's very important when you're playing Aphelios to have this selfish hyper carry mentality that you want everything. You want all the farm, you want all the kills, everything. But you also have to be responsible with these resources. When you're playing a hyper carry and you mess up, that's it. Your team just lost the game, you know? One mistake is all it takes. So you have to be responsible, but also selfish. You want all the farm and carry with it. It's easier said than done, but if you put those ideas in your head, I think that'll help you a lot towards achieving the goals that you're trying to achieve. Now let's talk a little bit about teamfighting. Teamfighting depends a lot on your weapons, but the most important part of teamfighting with Aphelios is understanding and knowing your damage and realizing the fact that you're in a mobile hypercarry. So if you get in a bad position, you don't really have any escape tool. So either you fight or you die. Therefore, positioning a bit safer than a lot of other ADCs with more tools will do you better. Patience is very important on this champ. If you try to rush into a fight, it will nearly always end badly because you don't have much outplay mechanics once something goes wrong. You're very good at kiting in, very kiting back, very bad at running in. So you don't want to just run headfirst into a fight. You want to play it slow, you want to breathe, you want to relax, and you want the enemy to be running into you, and then you make the montage plays happen. Flash can sometimes save you, but it's not reliable. You know, it's a 5-minute cooldown. And that's kind of it. You know, if you waste your flash, suddenly the next 3 fights are way, way harder. So you want to be really patient. You want to be a little bit safe, maybe safer than you're used to playing. I know a lot of people, I see them, they average like 7 deaths on Aphelios. And that's just, you know, it makes sense, right? He's in a mobile hypercarry, but if you're averaging 7 deaths on Aphelios, you're going to have a hard time winning games. That's all I'm going to say. So for me, the biggest thing I would say if you're new to Aphelios is position a bit safer than maybe you're used to. You do have all this fantastic damage and all that stuff that I was talking about earlier, but once someone gets onto you and once, you know, if you've made a mistake, it's really hard to get yourself out of it. You don't really have a way of like outplaying yourself out of a bad situation that a lot of other ADCs have, unless you can just overwhelm them with pure damage. And yeah, I think Aphelios is a really fun champ. I would definitely recommend him. He's probably maybe even my favorite champ. I had 100% win rate on him in competitive in the Spanish league until playoffs, in which I lost the game, or lost 2, I'm not sure. But yeah, he's one of my most played in solo queue, was last year as well. One of my favorite champs for sure, if maybe even my favorite, I'm not sure. And yeah, I hope you learned something watching this. And I'm sorry about the guides taking a little bit longer than I expected. I said it was gonna be weekly, and now it's been a little bit more than a week. But I hope you still enjoyed. And I hope you come check out my stream. Maybe I'll be playing Aphelios for you. Or I'll be playing another ADC. And maybe even some Draven for those, who are here for that. Thank you guys very much for watching. And leave a like if you enjoyed. And subscribe to the channel for more gaming content. Woo!